Logan darted between the hurried bodies in the middle of 6th Avenue, the deafening sound of horns and shouts swelling around him. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. He simply saw the blonde boy stumbling past the crosswalk, the delivery truck speeding violently closer, and jumped. Thin arms, shallow breaths, the asphalt burning beneath his bare feet. In a single second, he threw himself in front of Oliver, grabbed the strap of the red backpack and pulled the boy back, feeling the brush of tires and the thud of the truck braking so close that he nearly lost his balance. Oliver fell on top of Logan, eyes wide in panic, and only then was the noise replaced by a heavy silence, full of shock and disbelief. People stopped. Some raised their phones, others simply watched. But nobody, except for a woman in expensive clothes and a desperate look, ran toward the two. Grace didn't think twice. She knelt on the ground, pulled Oliver into her arms and cried softly, hugging her son with blind strength. Logan remained motionless, arms still around the boy. The driver cursed, accelerated, and vanished. The crowd began to disperse. "Oh my God, you saved me, you saved my son," Grace stammered, and only then did she notice the state of the boy with Oliver. Dirty clothes, a face marked by exhaustion, trembling hands. Logan tried to pull away, but Oliver's eyes stuck to his, scared and full of something hard to explain, a mix of gratitude, fascination, and astonishment. Before any questions, Grace grabbed her phone and called someone, her voice trembling, words quick. "He was almost run over, yes, but he's fine. Someone saved him." Oliver never took his eyes off Logan, as if he wanted to remember his face forever. Grace then turned to Logan. "What's your name? Please." But Logan just shook his head, murmured, "Logan," and started to walk away. She tried to thank him, opened her purse, offered money. Logan only backed away more, without looking back. If you've made it this far, you need to subscribe to the channel right now. Here you'll find real stories of courage, lives crossing in unexpected ways, extreme situations that test what is most human in us. If you've ever felt that destiny can change in a second, you'll see yourself in what's to come. Only those who stay until the end discover that even the simplest gestures can change everything forever, including your own view of the world. On the sidewalk, Oliver slowly got up, still without saying anything. Grace tried to compose her son, looking at Logan disappearing into the crowd, feeling that there was something special about that boy, something she couldn't name. Logan vanished around the corner, his heart pounding not only from the fright, but from the strange feeling of being, even for an instant, noticed. Not as a threat, not as a shadow, but as someone capable of saving a life. In that small moment, all of Manhattan seemed different, but nobody knew that right there something had been awakened, and the lives of all three would never be the same. Logan walked to the nearest square, his steps fast, fear returning. He knew he couldn't stay there. The longer he stood still, the greater the chances someone would want to know his name, cause trouble, or take away everything he had barely managed to gather. But even in the cold, the memory of Oliver's gaze wouldn't leave his mind. No one had ever looked at him that way. For a moment, Logan almost allowed himself to feel proud, until he remembered that for people like him, there was no room for heroes. The real world doesn't reward people who don't even have a place to sleep. While Grace took Oliver home, trying to regain control, she realized her son wouldn't stop asking about the boy. "Mom, why did he leave? Where does he live? Will you find him again?" She answered as best she could, but she knew that her orderly, safe life, built on plans and certainties, had been invaded by something new. An invisible thread now linked their lives to that of a stranger, and she had no idea yet how much that fleeting moment would shake everything she believed to be unchangeable. Night fell, and Logan, curled up on a bench, couldn't shake off the sound of tires, the warmth of Oliver's body in his arms, the shock, the fear, the bitter taste of hunger. And yet there was something new pulsing there, a spark of hope, a memory that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to truly be seen, even if just for a second. But the streets of New York don't forgive easy hope, and Logan was about to discover that, after being noticed, he would never be invisible again. Grace spent the rest of the day on edge, the rescue scene replaying in her mind like a movie she couldn't pause. Her hands trembled doing even the most trivial things. The taste of coffee seemed distant, unreal, while Oliver, quieter than usual, played with the red backpack, now marked by a faint stain, almost a silent trophy of what had happened. No matter how hard she tried, Grace couldn't focus on anything. In every corner of the huge apartment on Central Park West, she saw flashes of the frightened gaze of the dirty boy who had saved her son. It was as if Logan's presence had clung to the air, bringing with it an uncomfortable sense of debt and urgency. That same night, as soon as Richard arrived home, the woody scent of his expensive cologne announcing his presence even before he walked in, Grace almost stumbled over her words as she tried to recount what had happened. She described the accident in nervous detail: the broken heel, the crowd, Logan's firm hand pulling Oliver to safety. Richard, however, only frowned, looked at his son, checked if he was all right, and in a cold, practical tone asked, "And where is this boy now?" Grace explained that he'd refused the money, that he'd disappeared before she could even thank him properly. Her husband laughed, a short, dry laugh. "No one does anything for free in New York. I bet that kid's used to this sort of thing. Gets a few bucks and disappears." Oliver, hearing this, whispered back, "No, Dad. He didn't want money. He just saved me." But Richard didn't even look in his son's direction, too busy replying to emails on his phone. The next day, with the sun bathing the city's tall buildings in gold, Grace felt an almost physical urgency to find Logan. She took Oliver with her, walking through the neighborhood, scanning every corner, every young face that seemed out of place among the luxury and neglect of the city. She asked diner owners, showed a photo she had accidentally taken from a distance during the rescue. She received only vague looks and empty promises. Oliver clung to her hand the whole time, anxious, saying maybe Logan was near the park, or maybe sleeping under the overpass where he'd seen other boys like him. But Grace found nothing but the city's indifferent emptiness. When they returned home, Richard was already waiting, impatient. He wanted to know where they had been, why they were wasting time looking for someone who was probably just another sad story hustler. Grace tried to explain what she felt, the need to truly thank him, to do something, but Richard raised his voice cold. "Grace, we can't get involved with people like that. Today he saved our son. Tomorrow he might rob us." Oliver, who until then had watched everything in silence, ran to his room, locked himself inside, and cried quietly, clutching the red backpack. In the days that followed, Oliver changed. He was no longer the outgoing boy who talked about everything at dinner, who told jokes during bath time. He became introspective, spending hours drawing a boy running between cars or staring out the window as if searching for something on the other side of the city. Grace noticed the change, but every attempt to talk about Logan was cut short by her husband. "That's enough of this, Grace. We can't fix the world." But Oliver's world at that moment was summed up by Logan's disappearance and the feeling that something important had been taken from him without explanation. Across town, Logan was doing his best to forget. He tried not to go back to 6th Avenue, avoided the busier areas where it was easy to be seen or recognized. Still, the memory of Oliver's gaze haunted him. No one had ever looked at him that way, not even his own parents, long before they disappeared. Logan wondered if he'd done the right thing by running away so quickly. The money Grace had offered could have bought food, a blanket, maybe even a night in a shelter. But to accept would have been to admit that help had a price, that saving someone was a kind of transaction. Deep down, he knew he didn't want to be seen that way. Grace, tormented by a sense of powerlessness, decided to do more. She sent messages to friends from the charity club, asking them to keep an eye out. She didn't share all the details, ashamed to admit she felt an inexplicable connection with a strange boy from the streets. "Just let me know if you see a boy named Logan, about 12 or 13. Brown hair, thin, worn clothes." The response was almost always the same. "New York is full of Logans." But with every indifferent reply, Grace felt further away from everything that once made sense. Meanwhile, Oliver didn't give up. Instead of going straight home after school, he asked the nanny to take a walk in the park. Sometimes he slipped away by himself for a few minutes, looking at the benches and alleys, hoping to spot that familiar face. Whenever he saw someone similar, his heart raced, but disappointment quickly followed. Still, he kept trying. One day, while waiting on the swing, an old lady sat next to him and asked why he seemed so sad. Oliver answered simply, "I lost someone I never really got to know." The woman smiled, touched his shoulder, and said, "Sometimes the people who pass quickly through our lives leave the deepest marks." Those words echoed in Oliver's mind for days. At home, Richard grew more and more uncomfortable with his son's silence and his wife's distant gaze. He felt excluded, irritated by his lack of control over the situation. One night, seeing Grace looking out the window, he whispered, "If that boy shows up here again, I'll make sure he stays far away. I don't want trouble for our family." Grace didn't reply, just kept staring at the city, as if searching for something among the lights. Time went by, and the silent tension became routine. Oliver stopped asking for new toys, preferring to draw or look through family albums. Grace began making anonymous donations to shelters, but nothing seemed to ease the weight in her chest. And Logan, in his world of shadows and small acts of survival, carried the memory of Oliver like a spark of humanity in a daily life marked by neglect. But everything was about to change. One afternoon, Oliver saw something different in the park. A boy, sitting alone, head down, drawing on the ground with a stick. His heart pounded. Could it be Logan? He approached slowly, trying not to scare him. When the boy looked up, it wasn't Logan, but the smile he gave Oliver was kind. They exchanged a few words, but that brief contact rekindled in Oliver the desire to find his unlikely friend. He decided right then he wouldn't stop searching until he could truly thank him. At the same time, Grace made a silent promise. If she ever saw Logan again, she would do everything differently. She wouldn't try to reward him, wouldn't treat him as charity, but as someone with his own worth, someone who needed to be heard, not bought. And without knowing it, that determination would change the fate not only of Logan, but of her whole family. Elsewhere in the bustling streets of Manhattan, Logan also felt something changing. For the first time in a long while, he had a reason to hope for tomorrow. A silent wish to be found, to have his name remembered, not as just another forgotten face in the crowd, but as someone capable of making a difference. Fate was already moving, silently, preparing encounters that would test the limits of forgiveness, compassion, and courage. What had started as a purely impulsive act was now turning into an invisible thread, ready to intertwine in ways no one could predict. The suspense thickens. Oliver will not give up. Grace is beginning to change quietly, and Logan, even as he flees the past, is no longer the same. Richard watches everything from a distance, determined to protect what he believes is his, but unaware that the true threat to his family might lie precisely in what he does not understand: the transformative power of an unlikely encounter. Nothing will ever be the same, and this is only the beginning of a story you won't want to miss. If you feel that knot in your chest tightening, get ready. The next chapter brings the unexpected, as the silent search begins to break down barriers and reveal hidden secrets between fear and hope. Fate seemed to take pleasure in drawing parallel lines in Manhattan, where wealth and poverty share sidewalks, glances, and even sunlight. It was in the fall, when the golden leaves of Central Park covered the ground like an old, expensive carpet, that Oliver met Logan again. There were no fireworks, no wide smiles. Oliver was sitting on his favorite bench, the same one where he used to draw superheroes while the wind blew cold, and Logan, with his worn backpack on his lap, appeared out of nowhere. But this time he didn't run, nor did he look frightened. He stopped a few steps away, silent, and it was Oliver who broke the silence with the courage of someone who has lost something precious and doesn't want to lose it again. "You disappeared." Logan shrugged, shrinking as if trying to become invisible, but he didn't want to run anymore. "No one misses me," he replied, with that dry manner of someone who is used to having neither a home nor a lap to rest in. And so, in a clumsy and awkward way, a secret routine began. Oliver invented excuses for the nanny, for his parents, even for himself. Sometimes he said he was going to feed the squirrels, other times that he wanted to play by the lake. Logan always appeared at the same time, with cautious short steps. But as soon as he saw Oliver on the bench, fear gave way to something new, the strange confidence of being expected. They spoke little at first. Oliver asked where Logan came from, where he was going, if he had family. Logan answered with short sentences, looking away. But it was impossible not to notice how important that clandestine friendship was to both of them, even if they couldn't admit it. Meanwhile, their lives followed opposite but equally lonely paths. Oliver, even surrounded by luxury, lived in a glass castle. The apartment overlooking the park was silent. His father always traveling, his mother increasingly absent, the polite staff always distant. Expensive toys held no appeal without company. Meals were served under golden lights but rarely accompanied by conversation. At night, Oliver heard through the walls the muffled arguments between Grace and Richard about money, the future, how to raise a son without making the same mistakes of the past. And every time he heard Logan's name whispered or argued over, he felt a mix of pride and fear. He wanted to tell the truth, but knew that if he did, he would lose the little freedom he had. Logan, on the other hand, faced daily battles Oliver could never imagine. He woke up early, even when he didn't need to avoid being kicked out of the shelter before cleaning time. Sometimes he slept on benches. Sometimes he shared space with other boys on subway cars, pretending to be just another late student. He ate what he could, forgotten slices of pizza, church donations, fruit stolen from distracted stands. The cold was a constant adversary, as were loneliness, fear of strange adults, and the shame of asking for help. But in that world of harsh survival, Logan found a new reason to leave his hiding place: his meetings with Oliver in the park, where, for an hour, he could forget hunger and abandonment. Their friendship grew in silence, made up of knowing glances, whispered confidences, and invented games. One day, Oliver brought a sketchbook and showed his superhero drawings. Logan looked on, curious, took the pencil and, without saying anything, drew a boy on a rooftop, looking at a lit window. Oliver recognized himself in the drawing but didn't say anything, feeling a strange mix of happiness and sadness at the same time. Another day, Logan said he knew how to climb the highest branches of the park's trees to escape fights, or just to look at the world from above. Oliver asked to learn as well, and between laughter and scares, the two discovered that, despite living in opposite realities, they shared the same thirst for belonging. As time passed, the material differences between them became less and less important. Oliver, tired of expensive toys, had more fun with improvised games, running around the trees, making bets to see who could hold their breath longest under the park tunnel. Logan, used to not trusting anyone, began to share small stories about his childhood, fragments of happy memories before everything collapsed. And in these timid confessions, Oliver understood for the first time what it really means to be alone. It's not the lack of people around you, but the absence of someone who truly sees who you are. The contrast between their lives was striking, but instead of pushing them apart, it brought them together. Oliver realized how his problems, once huge, could be small compared to Logan's struggles. He felt ashamed of his fear of the dark, of his anger over not getting the latest video game, while his friend fought every day for a bit of food and a safe place to sleep. Logan, in turn, admired Oliver's courage, not for facing the big city, but for facing his own loneliness, for breaking his father's rules just to maintain a friendship that, in the world's eyes, made no sense. With each meeting, trust grew, and with it, the fear of being discovered. Oliver knew that if his parents found out, Logan would be banned from coming near. Maybe even the police would be called. Logan felt the same. He wanted to protect Oliver, but knew that one wrong move could ruin everything. Still, they kept meeting, breaking the rules, creating a secret world where both could simply be boys, free from the labels of rich and poor, invisible and protected. The suspense intensified with every meeting. One day, Oliver brought a snack from home to share with Logan. They laughed together as if there were no walls between them. On another, Logan showed Oliver how to cross the entire park through hidden shortcuts, avoiding adults' eyes. And it was during that secret journey, under the golden trees, that they promised never to abandon each other, no matter what happened. They didn't need many words. Their pact was sealed in glances, smiles, and shared silences. At the same time, at home, Richard sensed something was off. He noticed his son growing more distant, his wife more reserved. He asked several times why Oliver was spending so much time at the park, but Oliver always came up with convincing excuses. Grace, on the other hand, didn't press, perhaps because deep down she also wished to find Logan, or maybe because she felt that her son finally had something no money could buy, a real connection. On the days when Logan couldn't meet Oliver, he felt the weight of the world come back full force. It was like waking up from a good dream only to fall back into the harsh reality of the streets. But each reunion renewed his hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't doomed to be invisible forever. And Oliver, by his friend's side, discovered that you don't need much to feel whole. It's enough to be accepted, to be seen, to be remembered. The lives of Logan and Oliver, crossed by chance, now walked side by side, even if in secret. Each step in the park was a challenge to fate, a silent bet that despite the world, there was still room for the improbable, for friendship, for the simplest and rarest feeling, the sense of belonging, to a place, to someone. And little did they know that in that very park, among dry leaves and unspoken promises, something greater awaited them, ready to turn everything upside down. The suspense thickens. Differences fade away in the face of the common desire to be accepted, to have someone to trust. But fate, ever watchful, prepares its next move, and what seemed like a simple friendship is about to be put to the test, in a twist that neither Logan nor Oliver could ever predict. The routine of Oliver and Logan's secret meetings continued, protected by the constant rhythm of Manhattan, and by the carelessness of adults who, in their rush, rarely notice what happens in the shade of the Central Park trees. For the two boys, that was a world of their own, made up of confidences, challenges, stifled laughter, and a strange complicity that seemed impossible to explain to anyone outside. But fate, as always, was ready to intervene, and it took just a small slip for everything to change. It was on a cloudy afternoon, with low-hanging clouds over the skyscrapers and the cold wind carrying the smell of rain, that Grace decided to go for a walk. Richard was out of town on business. Oliver had said he'd be playing in his room, but she noticed the odd silence in the apartment. Something about the absence of noise, music, or laughter bothered her. Looking out the window, she saw a blonde figure hurrying out the building's gate, glancing around, almost as if running from someone. It wasn't the first time Oliver had left without telling anyone, but this time, Grace felt compelled to follow him. She grabbed her coat, slipped down the stairs without making a sound, and blended into the crowd with careful steps, her heart racing with each block. That's how, crossing the park's side entrance, she spotted her son sitting on a bench with a thin boy, in worn clothes and an alert expression. They hadn't noticed her presence. Grace stood still, half hidden behind a thick tree trunk, watching. Their conversation was lively, full of gestures and smiles. Oliver looked different, free and light in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. Beside him, Logan held a piece of paper and a short pencil, his eyes shining as he drew something Oliver described enthusiastically. Grace moved closer, quietly. She could hear Oliver telling stories about battles between heroes and villains, and Logan, in response, turned them into quick, skillful lines. His dirty hands seemed to dance over the paper, creating detailed, vivid scenes. Oliver smiled, admiring as Logan showed him the drawing. A city illuminated at night with two boys atop a building gazing at the horizon. It was a powerful image, full of feeling, unlike anything she had ever seen in her son's art classes. The shock was immediate. Grace felt her chest tighten. On one hand, her maternal instinct screamed to break up that improper friendship, to protect Oliver from any risk. On the other hand, something inside her broke, the realization that her son was finally happy. She stayed there a while longer, unmoving, watching the two share a sandwich, laughing at secret jokes, oblivious to the rest of the world. When the rain threatened, Oliver said goodbye to Logan, promising to return the next day, and ran home. Only then did Grace step out of her hiding place and approach the bench. When Logan noticed her, he froze, his whole body tensed, ready to flee. But Grace sat slowly beside him, showing her empty hands in a gesture of peace. Silence hung heavy for a moment. Grace began to speak carefully, saying she knew who he was, that she recognized him from the day of the accident, and thanked him once again for saving Oliver's life. Logan stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the ground. "You draw really well," Grace said, gently picking up the paper left on the bench. "No one's ever told me that," Logan whispered in reply. Grace, overtaken by a mix of curiosity and compassion, asked where he'd learned to draw like that. Logan slowly told stories of a difficult childhood, of a mother who loved art but disappeared too soon, of nights spent scribbling on pieces of newspaper under streetlights. The sincerity with which he spoke touched Grace deeply. She hadn't known what to expect from the encounter, maybe fear, resentment, anger, but found only a boy with extraordinary talent and a discreet sadness he couldn't fully hide. Grace asked if Logan would like some real paper and pencils. He hesitated, then shook his head, more out of uncertainty than pride. As they talked, Grace noticed Logan's quick intelligence. He asked questions, observed everything closely, mentioned names of painters and architects she never expected from someone so young and with so few resources. He spoke about old buildings he saw from the shelter window, about details in stained glass at churches, about the way the city's light changed at different times of day. Grace was impressed, and for the first time she saw Logan beyond the worn-out clothes. She saw raw potential, a rare ability to transform even New York's harsh landscape into something beautiful. When the rain finally started to fall, Grace suggested he accept a borrowed coat, but Logan refused, saying he couldn't show up at the shelter in new clothes. It would attract the wrong attention. Grace understood and respected that, but insisted on giving him a pad of paper and some pencils. She asked him to keep drawing, to show what he saw in the world. Logan, surprised by her trust, promised to return the next day, but with one condition. He didn't want Oliver to ever know about their meeting. Grace agreed, realizing that for that boy, dignity was all he had left. That night, Grace didn't tell Richard anything, but for the first time in months, she felt a delicate hope. She saw in Logan's talent not just a way out for him, but an opportunity to show her son that people are not defined by what they own, but by what they're capable of creating. Oliver, in turn, noticed that his mother was acting differently, lighter, less tense. The next day, he went to the park even more excited, not knowing that his mother was now watching from afar, ready to protect, but also to learn. The secret, once revealed, didn't bring a rupture, but an opening. Grace began going to the park often, sitting far away just to watch the boys together, sometimes discreetly leaving art supplies on nearby benches. She noticed that Logan was generous with Oliver, teaching, sharing, listening to his stories with genuine attention. She saw how Oliver bloomed beside his friend, more confident, more spontaneous, as if Logan's presence filled something that had always been missing. With each new drawing, with each conversation, Grace realized that what was blossoming there was bigger than any fear. Logan was not only talented in his lines, but in how he saw the world from angles nobody else noticed. And gradually, she found the courage to break the barrier between their two worlds. She decided that if Richard ever found out, he would no longer be able to separate the boys so easily. Logan's talent was now a precious secret, shared only between her, her son, and the street boy. Yet something hung in the air, a subtle suspense. Logan, even as he accepted Grace's approach, always seemed ready to disappear. There were secrets in his eyes that no pencil could draw, and Grace, sensing the growing tension, knew she was standing at the edge of an abyss. If she pressed too hard, she might scare the boy away. If she held back, she would lose the chance to change all of their destinies. The park, stage to so many confidences, was now also the setting of a silent promise that not everything needs to be lost, that not all encounters end in farewell. But time in New York never stands still, and shadows were already starting to move around the three of them, threatening to turn the secret into something impossible to hide for much longer. And what Grace didn't yet know was that, by choosing to trust Logan, she was already changing not only his fate, but that of her own family, and that the real test of all of this was about to begin. The fragile tranquility that hovered over the routine of Grace, Oliver, and Logan was, in truth, a delicate bubble, ready to burst with the slightest breath of suspicion. And that breath came, as so often in life, by chance. It was on a gray Friday when Richard decided to come home early to surprise the family. He didn't tell anyone, not even the answering machine. He climbed the stairs of the building with the commanding stride of someone used to opening doors and ruling over silences. When he entered the apartment, he found it odd that Oliver wasn't there, as he usually was, at the piano or with his digital toys. Grace was restless, her eyes glued to the clock as if counting the minutes until something important happened. "Where is Oliver?" Richard asked, setting his leather briefcase on the marble table. "He went to the park with the nanny," Grace lied, her voice tense with a brief pause before finishing the sentence. "Without telling us?" Richard's tone was sharp, suspicion already taking root. "He needs fresh air, Richard, and he doesn't have to tell me everything." The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken judgments. Richard tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being excluded was stronger than his pride. He decided to go out for a walk, hoping to find his son. He crossed the street quickly, his steps heavy, his eyes searching for anything out of place. In Central Park, it didn't take long for him to spot Oliver sitting with another boy, side by side on a bench hidden behind an old oak tree. He approached quietly, unseen, and heard laughter, low voices. the sound of a pencil scratching on paper. A dull fury rose in his throat. It was that boy again, the same one from the accident, the same one his wife insisted on praising in their interrupted conversations. He felt betrayed and, at the same time, afraid to see his own son so at ease with someone from outside his world. He waited until Oliver said goodbye and ran off, then confronted Logan out of nowhere. The boy's figure, small, fragile, did nothing to soften Richard's icy tone. "What are you doing here with my son?" he asked, voice low but hard. Logan froze, his sweaty hands hiding the drawing. He didn't reply. Richard pressed on, increasingly harsh, accusing Logan of taking advantage of Oliver's kindness, of wanting some benefit, money, an easier path. He said he knew this kind of people, that he knew how the streets worked, and that he wouldn't tolerate seeing his family involved with strangers. Logan tried to explain, stammered, but Richard's anger swallowed any words. "You will not come near my son again. Do you hear me? I'll call the police if I see you here again." Logan ran, his heart pounding, his face burning with shame and fear. Those words, heavy with contempt, opened wounds he thought had already healed. He ran so much his lungs burned, his eyes filled with tears, never looking back. When he reached the shelter, he curled up in a corner, clutching his drawings to his chest. In that moment, the entire city seemed hostile, gigantic, built to crush anyone who dared to dream of something better. Oliver returned home unaware of the confrontation, but soon sensed the tension in the air. Richard called him into the office to talk, away from his mother's ears. He closed the door, sat behind the desk, his fingers drumming on the polished wood. He made it clear that he didn't want to see him with that street boy again, that people like Logan only bring trouble, that the worlds of rich and poor don't mix. Oliver protested, cried, tried to explain that Logan was his friend, that he wanted nothing more than that. But Richard was unyielding, saying that if he disobeyed, he would be punished severely. He'd lose all his privileges, wouldn't go out alone anymore, and might even have his school changed. Grace heard Oliver's muffled sobbing after the conversation, but before she could comfort her son, Richard appeared, his eyes steely with resolve. "This can't go on, Grace. I'm thinking about what's best for our family." But for the first time, Grace didn't back down. "And what if what's best isn't separating our son from the one who makes him happy?" she replied, her voice shaky, but filled with something new, defiance. Richard responded with silence, and that was even more violent than any harsh word. The following days were a parade of slammed doors, silent meals, and crossed glances full of veiled accusations. Oliver stopped going to the park, refused to play piano, and drew nothing. He shut himself off in his thoughts, reliving each meeting with Logan in his memory, every laugh, every promise that they'd be friends forever. He felt betrayed by his own father, unable to understand how a friendship, something so simple and beautiful, could be seen as a threat. Logan felt the absence too. He returned to the park at the usual times, hoping to see Oliver appear at any moment. Every time he saw a blonde boy from afar, his heart would race, only to be crushed by disappointment. His art supplies ran out, the cold returned, and the park, once a place of freedom, turned into a hostile space, full of painful memories. Richard's words echoed every time he looked at his dirty hands. "You will not come near my son again." Grace, feeling powerless, tried to reason with her husband. She argued that Logan was different, that their son needed that friendship, but Richard closed himself off even more, threatening to call the police if he saw Logan near the building. "I won't let a street boy put everything we've built at risk." The marriage, once sustained by a comfortable routine, now teetered on doubts, resentments, and a cutting silence. For the first time, Grace considered leaving home, not out of fear, but because she couldn't bear to see her son withering, her husband becoming someone unrecognizable, and her own happiness slipping through her fingers. At the height of the crisis, Oliver wrote a letter to Logan, hiding it inside a book left on his favorite bench in the park. It was a short letter, but filled with emotion. "I miss you. No matter what they say, you're my friend. I'll find you again. I promise." Logan never found the letter. The days passed, each one harder than the last, until both boys, through different paths, started to believe that maybe the world of adults really was made of insurmountable walls. That night, as the wind rattled the window, Grace sat at the kitchen table staring at a photo frame where she and Oliver smiled years ago. still free from the weight of adult choices. Silent tears rolled down her face, not just for the loss of her son's friendship, but for the end of a family she had once believed she could protect. Outside, the storm finally broke over Manhattan, washing the streets, taking away the last trace of innocence. The suspense thickens. Oliver feels betrayed. Logan sinks even deeper into isolation. Grace stands up to Richard as never before, and the once stable marriage collapses. And in the shadows of the city, life is preparing an unexpected blow, something that will test everything each of them believes they know about love, loss, and redemption. The boys' reunion seems impossible, but fate, silently, has not yet spoken its last word. Logan vanished from the park like a ghost. No sign, no news, not even rumors among the boys who slept in subway stations. The favorite bench, the one where the drawings were born, remained empty day after day, even when the sky was blue, even when the autumn leaves spun across the ground. Oliver tried to convince himself that maybe Logan had simply moved on, found shelter, a new place to survive, but deep down he felt it was more than that. And each day without his friend only deepened the silence inside the house, a cold emptiness that no adult voice could warm. The Parkers' apartment turned into a kind of aquarium. The sound of Grace and Richard's arguments was muffled, conversations reduced to short phrases about appointments, money, and then appointments again. Grace, restless, buried herself in volunteer work, but felt the hours dragging a secret guilt, as if she had left some door open and now didn't know how to close it. Richard tried to drown himself in numbers, close deals, raise the walls around the family even higher, but every night, all it took was a glance at Oliver, now pale, withdrawn, and silent, to feel that something essential had been ripped from his world. The boy even avoided the piano, his favorite escape. The heavy silence in the house was cutting. Then, tragedy struck, brutal and without warning. On Monday, Oliver woke in the early hours with a sharp pain in his chest, breathing in whispers. Grace ran barefoot into his room and saw the boy sweating cold, hands trembling, gaze lost. Richard called the hospital, his voice nearly choking, the fear obvious even to anyone who had never seen him lose control. Within minutes, the ambulance was racing across the city, red lights reflecting on the building ceiling, carrying Oliver and his parents in a whirlwind of fear and urgency. The diagnosis was relentless, a hidden heart problem, worsened by emotional stress and sleepless nights. The doctor said the situation was serious, that weeks of observation would be necessary, maybe even surgery. For Grace, everything lost meaning. Work, appointments, worries about routine. She practically moved into the hospital by her son's side, keeping watch over his sleep and the irregular beats of his heart. Richard tried to look strong, but with every visit, every vague update, the infallible businessman facade cracked. Fear kept him from thinking about business, and all the old coldness was replaced by suffocating anxiety. In the white hospital room, Oliver would quietly ask, whenever he woke up, "Mom, do you think Logan knows I'm here?" Grace held his hand and lied, saying yes, that Logan must know and that he was cheering for him too. But deep down, the absence of the street boy was like an open wound. And as the days went by, Grace found herself wishing more than ever that she could see him, even if just to say thank you, or to say she missed him. One night, while Oliver slept and Richard cried quietly in the corridor, Grace wrote a letter and gave it to one of the nurses on duty, asking her to let her know if any boy named Logan showed up at the hospital. It was a useless, desperate gesture, but it was all she could do. While Oliver fought to recover, news of his hospitalization soon leaked to the press. It didn't take long for photographers and reporters to crowd in front of the hospital, speculating about the sole heir of the Parkers and the cause of his health problem. The scandal, at first just a whisper in the media, quickly grew. Someone in Richard's inner circle leaked personal information about the family, exposing details about Oliver's isolation, the couple's recent fights, and even rumors of unusual friendships. A journalist even mentioned a mysterious boy seen several times in the park with the Parkers' heir. The pressure was unbearable. Richard, used to controlling every variable, could no longer protect the family's image. Investors called demanding explanations. Old colleagues made sly comments, and suddenly the fortress he had tried to build became a cracked glass display, ready to shatter. Grace, now more of a mother than ever, stopped worrying about reputation. For her, only Oliver mattered, but the boy seemed to wither with each absence, as if hope itself was tied to the presence of that lost friend. One afternoon, while Oliver slept, Grace opened the nightstand drawer and found one of Logan's old drawings, the one depicting the two boys atop a building looking out over the city. The paper was worn, the colors a little smudged, but the emotion was the same. Grace felt the lump in her throat tighten. In that moment, she understood what she'd been ignoring for weeks. Logan's presence was never a threat. It was a lifeline, a bridge between worlds. Without him, they were all lost, each in their own way. Richard, seeing his wife cry over the drawing, felt the weight of his own mistake. He remembered Logan's face, the frightened eyes, the silent pride, the unlikely generosity. He realized, too late, that casting the boy out hadn't just removed a stranger from the family. It had extinguished the only spark of true humanity in that luxurious, empty home. As the family crumbled under the weight of tragedy and public exposure, Logan, somewhere in the city, suffered too. He'd heard about the rich boy hospitalized, had seen Oliver's photo in the newspapers, but didn't dare go to the hospital. He felt he was no longer welcome there, that the world of the rich and safe had no place for someone like him. He spent sleepless nights drawing Oliver by the lake, inventing imaginary dialogues where everything could be different. But the fear of making things even worse was stronger than the longing. The days dragged on. Oliver underwent a delicate surgery and, by a thread, survived. When he opened his eyes, still groggy from anesthesia, the first thing he asked for was his sketchbook. Richard, trembling, handed him the book. Oliver drew an empty park bench and cried quietly. "He was my friend, Dad, that's all. Why can't it be simple?" For the first time, Richard had no answer. He just sat beside his son, held his hand and stayed silent, feeling the weight of everything unsaid and everything he'd prevented. The Parkers' apartment was never the same again. Grace and Richard started talking in low voices, the arguments replaced by complicit silences and unspoken apologies. They missed the joyful chaos Logan had brought, his simple way of looking at the world, Oliver's laughter. The absence of the street boy was a constant echo, a reminder that all the money in the world can't buy the essential: belonging, tenderness, true friendship. It was only in that devastating emptiness, as they cared for their son and faced their own ghosts, that Grace and Richard finally understood that everything they tried to keep away was exactly what their family needed most. And even without knowing it, each of them began to share the same wish: to find Logan again, not to fix the past, but to try perhaps to build something new from what was left. But the city is big, time is cruel, and second chances are rare. Still, in the hospital's silent room, a small beam of hope stubbornly pierced the window, illuminating the old sheet of paper with two boys atop Manhattan, as if, despite everything, life was about to surprise them. Sometimes time drags out the days as if it wants wounds to never close. Other times it speeds up when it senses it's time to heal, to gather the pieces and give fate a chance to rewrite its story. After the scare at the hospital, after days stretched between silence and prayer, the Parker family understood. They could no longer live trapped by what they had lost. It was Oliver, chest still stitched, voice still weak, who spoke first. "I wish I could see Logan. If he knows I'm better, maybe he'll come back." And in that instant, Grace and Richard knew it wasn't just their son who needed that reunion. It was the whole family. But finding an invisible boy in New York isn't easy. Richard, who once avoided any contact with life beyond the carpets of Central Park West, found himself knocking on shelter doors, asking on street corners, showing the only photo he had left, a drawing of Logan and Oliver together, smiling. Grace searched in churches, soup kitchens, even among volunteers and police, always repeating, "He's not a problem. He's the answer our family is looking for." Little by little, a chain of compassion began to form. A priest remembered the quiet boy who drew saints in the courtyard at night. A woman at the shelter recalled a gentle boy who never asked for more than he needed. But no one knew where Logan was. Meanwhile, Logan slept wherever he could. One night under a bridge, another behind a diner. He had learned early on how to protect himself from the cold and from disappointment. But contrary to what he thought, he couldn't erase Oliver from his memory. He remembered the laughter, the drawings, the little adventures, and most of all, that almost forgotten feeling of being seen. Even as he tried to move on, every corner seemed to pull him back to the past. Every unknown face brought the absurd hope of meeting again someone who, against all odds, truly missed him. The turning point came from where they least expected. A young social worker, moved by the family's search, found Logan sitting on the steps of a closed church, sketching in a battered pad. He approached carefully, explained that a family was looking for him, not to accuse, but to thank him, to apologize. Logan, wary, hesitated. It was hard to believe in second chances, but the worker persisted, showed him the drawing, told him about Oliver's hospitalization, the family's suffering. They just want to see you. They have nothing to offer except gratitude. Logan, caught between fear and hope, agreed to go. The reunion was set for late afternoon in the same park where it had all begun. Oliver, pale but smiling, waited on the favorite bench, Grace on one side, Richard on the other, both with faces marked by sleepless nights and hearts ready for whatever would come. When Logan appeared, thin, dirty, but with his head held high, a hush fell over the group. No one knew how to begin. Oliver was the first to run, hugging his friend tightly, tears running free. Grace came closer, thanking him between sobs, repeating 1,000 times how much she had missed him. But it was Richard who surprised everyone. He approached slowly, his eyes filled with tears, all pride from before utterly destroyed. He stopped in front of Logan, took a deep breath, and in a gesture that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier, knelt before the boy. "Forgive me, Logan, I was wrong. Really wrong. I let fear guide me when I should have let my heart." Logan, not knowing what to do, stood still. He had never seen an adult apologize. No one powerful had ever admitted a mistake to him. Grace, noticing the boy's hesitation, added, "We don't want to give you anything in return, Logan. We just want you to know that you changed our lives. If you want, you can be part of it." The invitation hung in the air, hovering between hope and fear. Logan hesitated, looking at Oliver, at Grace, at Richard. He remembered days of abandonment, nights alone, the pride he always kept so as not to give in. But there, facing the family's sincerity and regret, he felt the weight of the past become lighter. Time seemed suspended, until Logan finally replied in a whisper, "I missed you too." Oliver smiled. Grace cried. Richard, still on his knees, smiled like someone discovering it's possible to be born again. The street boy was, for the first time, invited in, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but as a true part of that rebuilt family. And so, with small gestures and newfound courage, each of them took the first step towards a new beginning. Yet the story still kept its deepest secret. On his first night in the new home, after a simple dinner, Logan stared out the open window. Grace sat beside him in silence. Slowly, Logan told what he had never told anyone, that he was running from his own past, not just from poverty, but from a home destroyed by violence, by the mistakes of others, by wounds that had never healed. He revealed how he lost his mother early, how he learned to survive, how the fear of trusting was really a fear of being hurt again. Grace listened without judgment, only holding his hand firmly. The ending was even more surprising than anyone could have imagined. Welcomed by the family, Logan began attending school, developing his artistic talent, and most importantly, learning to trust. Oliver healed after a long recovery, became a more sensitive, less lonely boy, someone able to see beyond the surface. And Richard, transformed by humility, became a volunteer, helping other street kids, trying to give back to the world a little of the hope he himself had received. And so, in the anonymous vastness of New York, a new family was born, not from wealth or blood, but from forgiveness and the courage to start again. Because in the end, life doesn't always give us the destiny we dream of, but sometimes it offers something even more precious, the chance to finally be seen, loved, and accepted. It was Logan, the invisible boy, who changed everyone's course, but it was love, the improbable, the imperfect, the real, that saved each of them. And as night fell over the city, a new story began to be written, born from the meeting of souls willing together to forgive and start anew.